Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Smith. I'm a writer and a podcast producer. And a lot of my work focuses around, or touches on LGBTQ plus life, and therefore I've written and produced work a little bit about the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s and subsequently. And I'm also a huge fan of Russell T Davies. Queer as Folk was a big part of my adolescence. I think I was 15 when Queer as Folk came out. I didn't come out until a bit later. And so when I saw that there was this new show that he was producing and writing called It's a Sin, I was like, well, of course I'm going to watch that, because I've grown up watching Russell's work. And I was absorbed by this character, Jill, who was not one of the more kind of like obvious prominent characters of the show, but I was absorbed by her, and watching it with my flatmates and talking about it with friends, I realized that everyone was really into this character, Jill. And then everyone had this moment, I think nationally, everyone who watched the show, people would talk to each other, being like, did you know she's a real person? Did you have that experience too? So we were all amazed to learn that Jill was a real person. And Jill's from Neath in South Wales and is a West End actress and performer, very famously in Les Miserables and Oliver. So we're going to have a bit of a song and dance.
With pleasure.
And also, there we go, the co-founder of West End Cares, which has raised millions and millions for HIV/AIDS causes. And it's so great that Jill's story is being told now through It's a Sin, and now through this amazing book that Jill has written. Obviously working with Russell T Davies in the background of It's a Sin. And I think there's a gorgeous quote from Russell in the beginning of the book, in the introduction, where he says, "It's a strange thing to realize that your old mate is a hero."
He's exaggerating there.
No, he's not at all. So please welcome our hero, Jill.
Oh, thank you.
What we're going to do is just have a conversation between me and Jill about some of the stories in the book and the themes of the book, and then we'll move over to Q&A from you all, because I'm sure that by that point you'll have loads of questions that you want to ask Jill as well. So Jill, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for writing this gorgeous book, telling a story that is just so important and we haven't heard before.
Okay.
But before we get into some of the details of the book, I want to hear a bit more about your background and your childhood in South Wales and going to the theatre group when you were a lot younger. So tell us about what your childhood and adolescence was like.
Okay, so I think, first of all, I did have a happy childhood, but I think that growing up in Neath in South Wales, I was actually born in London, but I don't really remember London at that point. I was taken to Wales my dad worked for the DVLA in Swansea, the vehicle licensing, and so we went to move there for him to have a job there. So I grew up in the valleys, and my mum's family were all Welsh, so that is what I feel is my home, and I feel Welsh. And it was a my parents were very open-minded people, but nevertheless, you grow up in a world where I think it's a small town. Neath was a small town, and you know, you have sort of accepted ways of behaviour, what you think is going to become of you in life. And I think that when I found the youth theatre, the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre, it was an eye-opener, really. I sort of found a whole group of people that were very different. You know, I found it all very exciting, and Russell Davies described the youth theatre as a safe place for people to be themselves, and I think it allowed people, not only people who were coming out quite young, actually, as you know, maybe before other people felt that they could come out. It was a safe space for everyone to express themselves and to grow, and sort of, so I think I owe a lot of the way that I am in life to the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre.
What was it about performing that captured you?
Again, I think that's a way to express yourself. I saw, believe it or not, I was taken by my religious instruction, RI, we used to call it in school, I don't know if people call it that now, RI teacher, to see a production of Godspell. And that actually did change my life overnight, because I thought, this is fantastic. This is now what I want to do. I'd gone through various obsessions, I think like people do. I wanted to be a vet. Then I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. Then I decided I would be an actress, and that one stuck.
Well, as an actress, you can do all of those things.
Exactly, that's it. And so I discovered that, there was a world out there, and then following on we had to audition for the youth theatre, and then you went away and you actually stayed somewhere and you worked on a production, and it was very life affirming.
What was it like? You knew Russell then.
I did.
In that period. So tell us a bit about that friendship in that period. What was he like, and how were you together?
Well, he was marvelous. He was absolutely. He was inspirational from the word go. I met him. He was about 14 years old. Have to admit I'm a little bit older, but not much. Like a couple of years older than Russell. But he was already writing. He would already entertain. That was his thing, because we had a few people within the youth theatre. There's always people who want to try and write stories, and that everyone was given opportunities, but there was something about Russell when he wrote a production that was entertaining from the word go. He always had a sense of humour. He could make people laugh. He was extraordinary, and you really didn't know that he was going places.
And you went places because you went to London.
I did.
To, as I said earlier, join the circus,
Yeah.
which was the performing arts world. So
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that process of getting to London and getting into the performing arts school?
So I don't know if there's anyone out there who is in the theatre or in entertainment in any way, but you have to go for an audition, and it's scary and it's quite grueling. When you don't really know what you're doing, because you get sent pieces, dialogue, plays, things to choose from to do your audition, to go to do the first audition. Maybe you have to sing, maybe you have to dance. It's all kind of everything to see. I think as well, I'm not sure, but I think they might want to just assess you as a person as well, to see if you are, cut out for it in any way, because I think some people maybe who I think were lovely actors and actresses who didn't get accepted first time around, maybe because you weren't ready, because I suppose you had to grow up. We were only 17, so you were leaving home, you were trying to get, accepted somewhere. When I got accepted in London, I was absolutely over the moon, but I didn't really think it through. I didn't really think, where do I live? So suddenly you have to find where to live, because we in drama school, we weren't sent to any sort of halls of residence, or we had no guidance or anything like that. It was just look for and find a flat, live somewhere, find somewhere to stay, then just get yourself to the college. And I think sometimes when people go to university, they get like Freshers' Week and all that. We didn't get anything like that. You just start working, and of course you're in all the time. You have classes and sessions and everything every day or all day. So. And
you were what, 17, 18?
17 when I auditioned, and then.
What year? Can I ask what year?
Oh, don't push it. It was 79.
79.
When I went, and then I'm 61 now. Don't mention the menopause.
No questions about that, please.
Yeah, so you're very young. You don't even realize how young you are, because, well, you think you're old. You think you think it's all there and this is happening, and then you're left on your own. I mean, my parents didn't leave me on my own. They cared. They came and checked a flat out, and it was actually, my first flat was awful. I don't know what my parents are thinking of. They think this is okay for me. My mum went, "Oh, you won't get anything nice in London." I think she just wanted me to come home, but. Eventually, you're meeting people, and people move around and they find different places to live, and you find friends, and the world changes again, so.
And you found a place.
I did.
Which was, the walls were pink, the curtains were pink, everything was pink.
Everything was pink.
Tell us about the friends that you were house hunting with.
Okay.
And how you found that place and what happened there.
So we genuinely landed on our feet when we found the Pink Palace. I as I said, had a terrible flat in my first year, and we didn't, you wanted to be near your college, so other people from our youth theatre had come to London, and they were in different colleges. And then a friend of mine, Martin Ellis, who is still, working in the theatre, works a lot actually, just doing some filming, and he's stayed in the business. He was reading a magazine called The Ham and High, Hampstead and Highgate, and he said, I found a flat, and it's £80 a week between 4 people.
£20 a week each?
£20 a week each. And we thought, oh, that's very good. That's very cheap. It's going to be awful. We went to see it. Jay went to see it first. He could not believe it. He said, you will not believe it, how lovely it is. It was a palace. It was all pink. The walls were dark pink. The carpets were sort of purpley pink. The sofas were Draylon, huge Draylon sofas, chandeliers, silver service. I do not know what this gentleman, who was a teacher, was thinking of giving it to students. I mean, I don't know how he dared. In this beautiful house in Highgate, in Hampstead, with lovely gardens and everything, we landed on our feet, and it was a joy.
I wonder whether it was like a good deal, because he thought, like, no one's going to want to rent this place. It's wall-to-wall pink, and you were all like, we want to rent this place.
And you didn't know how nice pink was for us.
Yeah.
It was. I think he was desperate to get it off his hands, because his daughter, he'd bought it for his daughter. Hello, I mean, they were rich. He bought it for his daughter, and for some reason, she didn't want to live there. So he kind of kept it, and then said he wanted to rent it out, and I think he just took... And we were on our best behaviour. I mean, we were. When we went to see it, we were being terribly, polite and trying to be well behaved. We were well behaved in the main.
And what were the friends like that you were meeting and making at drama school and creating that home with? Because you had a very specific sort of set of friends. So
I feel like it was very much an extension of our youth theatre friends. It was kind of that we were all the same sort of people. There was a lot of gay boys involved. B, there was a lot of theatre involved, and a lot of singing, and a lot of cabaret, and a lot of fun. And we all had the sort of similar sense of humour, the same kind of aim in life, and the same sort of wishes and desires, really. So we were a good, strong group of friends, and then we met friends who met friends. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't always, it wasn't all doves and swans and hugs and kisses. There were plenty of times when you have your normal arguments and who's paid the phone bill, and, we used to itemize phone calls. At one point, someone says, how many phone calls have you made? Because we shared the phone bill, and then if you had to pay per... you paid per phone call in those days.
Or per minute or something.
Well, you do pay per minute, or whatever, however it works. But there was a lot of angst about phone bills and that kind of stuff. So.
What was it like? So that's the kind of like early 80s for the gay male friends that you had. What were their lives like at that point? Probably having moved to London from somewhere else and trying to come out and that.
Yeah, so... all my gay friends had come out in our circle, except for one, actually. There was one boy who was very, very sort of, I don't know, closeted, very stressed about his sexuality. But generally, people came out amongst our circle, but they didn't come out to their families. They didn't come out in the broader world. There was always a guarding, always I listened to something the other day talking about pride, and one boy said, when he went to his first pride, that was the first time he was not in a minority. He was part of the majority, and he'd never felt that before. And I think our youth theatre and our drama school enabled people to feel part of not estranged, not in a group where you felt safe, where you felt like there was a lot of gay people, a lot of gay men, different from maybe gay women, but certainly in the theatre there was a lot of gay men, and so it was a bit encompassing. So I think they felt safe within our circle, but outside of our circle, people sort of pulled themselves in and behaved in a slightly different way. Well, in more than a slightly different way, in a very different way.
And then, sorry.
No, depending on your degree of how safe you thought. You know, if you were to go into something like a rugby club, then you just pretend to be straight. If you were going to a theatre event, you wouldn't have to pretend. So I think gay men gauged where they could be themselves and where they hid themselves.
And the Pink Palace was probably the place where they could be fully themselves.
I think so.
Thinking about that, tell us about the picture on the cover of the book.
Okay, so this...
Everyone can see that.
This picture is my friend who is, his name is Pinky. His name is Philip, his real name. His name is Pinky. He is alive and well to this day. He was working on the airlines, but he's done a sort of drag show, part-time drag show, a lot of his life. And this picture is a night at the Pink Palace, a real genuine party night that we had. And I went through loads and loads of photographs, and eventually I found one. And the publishers, when they chose it, they wanted one picture. I couldn't make an amalgam of pictures or anything, and I didn't really know what I'd ever done before, so I didn't know what I was looking for. And then I found that picture, and they sort of said, bingo, that's the one. So he is thrilled to be on the cover.
He's your cover girl.
He's my cover girl. He's calling himself the cover girl. He's trying to come. He tried to come today. He tries to come to as many things as we can. And he said, I'll be there. I'll sign the book.
So you're creating this home, early 80s, the Pink Palace, this like safe space, all these gay men around you, these great friendships forming, and then you read a story about this disease that seems to be affecting gay men. Yes. How did that feel when you read about that first off?
Well, when I first read it, I just read a little article, and I think it was a newspaper, but it could have been like a little supplement or something. I just remember reading it, and it was a kind of flu that had affected gay men in America. And it had said there were fatalities. It had said that it was kind of like a gay flu. And it was confusing. I can only say it was confusing. I can't imagine. And again, I looked at it, clocked it, because it said gay flu. And then I sort of put it to the back of my mind. I'd remembered it, but I didn't think much about it. You know, as you kind of do, I suppose. You just think, okay, it's not really anything to do with me. It's America, and, you know, but I clocked it.
And then as things started to emerge and, you know, more and more people were getting sick, you actually started to warn some friends about or ask them about it. I think there was a letter that you include in the book that you wrote to a friend. That was
a little bit further down the line, because you started to... First, I heard about it, and then didn't think any more about it. And then you start again to hear about it. And again, they think there was like... then they said it's a sort of cancer. And I remember reading like a gay cancer, and you think, how can it... You know, I had no idea, and I hadn't any medical knowledge or anything like that. So how can a disease be gay to start with? How can it just be attacking gay people? So didn't have any idea of what that meant. It continued to just be drip, drip, drip. You could hear a little bit about it. And then all of a sudden, there was a bit more about it being a gay... I don't think they said gay plague at that time, but they certainly were intimating that it was gay men that were becoming very sick. And then my friend was in New York, so I was panicking, trying to be casual. Hello, darling, can you be careful? Because we didn't have any idea that it was how it was spread. I mean, it's very strange when you think of it. You think about COVID, you kind of know it's in the air. We didn't know if it was in the air, if it was, you know, in food. It was a mystery. So I was just trying to say, be careful, because there's something going around, and, you know, you're a gay man, and they're saying it's gay, so...
And then how did it feel like you knew all these gay men, and then, you know, then you started to know more and more people that were actually being diagnosed as being positive, and then in the press, suddenly it became like a bigger national story, more and more, you know, hostility around it, especially in the press. What was the atmosphere like?
Well, it's really hard to sort of go from right when you suddenly find out about it, and then it escalates and escalates and escalates.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it becomes like an obsession amongst people. You suddenly realize, once one of our friends, which was a boy I was in drama school with, was infected, then it was right there. And so then it's a nightmare, because, it's a reality. It's terrifying. I was terrified. I didn't really, because they announced, there was information coming out all the time about it. It hadn't even been called AIDS. It was called HDLV3. They said it was a kind of leukemia virus. Then they said it was, it was lifestyle. It was the way people were behaving. It could have been linked to poppers, which was, I don't know if people know what it is. It's a kind of a recreational sort of drug, lifestyle drug. Is it that? Is it this? So it became an obsession to find out what it was. And so gradually, it was announced that it was sexual. It was infected in activities to do with sex, and then you didn't know what that meant really, so the whole thing was a conundrum. It was a real mix-up. So it was just frightening. It's just that horrible feeling that, something's there all the time, and people became really obsessed with trying to find out, or, don't. The main thing was, initially, everyone thought you're okay if you don't sleep with anyone from America. Weird, because that's so ridiculous. But because then they said, if you sleep with anyone from America, who slept with anyone from London, who slept with anyone, it was a massive mystery, really.
Who was the first friend who told you his status? Can you tell us about him?
Well, my first friend, who was a friend but not a very close friend, was a boy called Duncan, who was incredibly open and decided that he was going to be honest about it. And so he didn't tell me, literally come and sit down and tell me, but he didn't hide it amongst his friends from drama school. So he was open, and then he told his mother, and then he never told his father. So the thing that happened a lot was people felt they might be able to tell a brother or a sister, but they couldn't tell the whole family. So the whole thing was kind of who's told who said what, and he got sick, and he actually died very quickly, because it was in the very early days. There was very little, there was no treatment of any sort. There wasn't really any treatment for the pneumonias. People tended in the early days to get a pneumonia, and then it was an incurable pneumonia, so people died very quickly. Then, just like it's happened now with the pandemic, the medical profession learned some of the treatments, some things they could help. They could never cure it, of course, but they could help people get over certain infections, so people tended to live a bit longer. My very first friend, was name of Juan, who wrote me a little note, didn't want to say it to my face, wrote me a letter, and yeah, it's very sad. Told me that he was HIV positive, and and then from there on, it's something you learn, like you do with anyone you love and care for. You learn what your place is in that story of how I could help him, and how he didn't want to tell anyone, and that went on a very long time.
And that happens quite a lot in the book as you're going through that time period, and you're saying there, Juan, and then another one, and then another one.
Yes.
And it seems like you're the kind of friend and the kind of person that actually quite a few people came to you and said that about themselves, and that you were sort of keeping these secrets because they were confiding in you.
They did.
How did that feel, to be that supportive friend, but to several people at the same time?
What feels weird now is even like talking about that, because I knew they did. People told me. I don't know why that is. I have no idea why people chose to, why they felt, except that I would always try to be positive. I would always try to be like, okay, let's do our best. Let's deal with it. And try to be supportive and not really like panic or anything. I don't know why people felt they could, but they did, and I felt very privileged. I felt there is something kind of amazing about someone trusting you to that huge thing in their lives. And once I found that out, once I was very, very secretive. I told nobody. I kept, I can also remember my mum saying to me, when I was young, if someone tells you a secret, don't tell anyone because it's not your secret. Don't tell anyone because it's not your secret to tell. So I lived with that thought. I thought, okay, if someone tells me something, it's not mine to tell. Because I think some people do. They've got a secret. They tell somebody else, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. And all of a sudden, maybe 10 people know. I didn't break any trust at all. So I kept that very close to my heart.
You also just said that you don't know why people chose you. I think you've just answered your own question there. They knew they could trust you.
Maybe.
They knew you would be positive and that you would be supportive.
Maybe that's true.
It's an incredible testimony to the kind of friendship that
it's
you
incredible
give
when people trust you as well. It is an incredible feeling. And you don't want to let people down. But it gets, with HIV and AIDS, it got hectic because, people are not going to survive this.
Yeah.
And when is the time that you have to get your friend to tell that story? Because you can't just not tell anybody ever. And
you were supporting your friends in this way with their secrets and also the medical aspect of what they were going through, and you were being the friend, the amazing friend and the hero that Russell mentions, and yet at the same time,
not a hero.
People were writing to the Daily Express, writing letters saying homosexuals have brought the plague upon themselves, burning is too good for them, bury them in a pit.
The amount of abuse and cruelty from the newspapers was extraordinary, I think. And you can find loads of examples of people's prejudice and stigmatizing of gay men. And it was gay men that were stigmatized. And I will say as well, people that had, problems with intravenous drug users and sex workers also suffered from, the abuse of thinking it's your lifestyle, you deserve this, and that was made very, very clear. But I think on top of that, gay men had already struggled with trying to be accepted, and it was extremely cruel the way that people were treated from the moment that they knew Rock Hudson, Freddie Mercury.
Oh, yeah.
For the moment they knew those people, they were hounded, and so, they didn't have a minute to even have any privacy. But it was more like not about the illness, but more like the prejudice. So, it was vicious.
You did what you could do, which was get together with a bunch of other performers and set something up. Tell us about it. It started with Les Mis Cares.
Okay.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, because
you were in Les Mis?
I was in Les Miserables, and that was my little thrill for a job at that time, because it meant I was working in the West End, and I began to find out that there were other people. You kind of knew that other people might be involved with other friends that were HIV positive or had AIDS. I mean, you didn't, in those early days, you didn't really remain, some people remained HIV positive for a bit longer, but generally, once people were diagnosed HIV positive, it wasn't that long before people would get sick. Very different now. But so anyway, we decided to do something, so we set up. There was already a charity called Crusade, and there was the Terence Higgins Trust, both brilliant charities, and we just decided the ideal thing to do would be to raise money to, collect, to raise money for what we thought would be a cure for research. And so it just helped, really. I think anybody who, I don't know, another thing I heard was people always try to support and fundraise and look after what they love. So if you love someone, if you love something, you will try and fight for that. And so there was a lot of people in the West End. People started in companies in the West End. People died. A lot of people died. And so it's quite horrible. I think in Miss Saigon, 3 people died. In Starlight Express, people died. So people were very inspired to raise money. So we set it up, myself and 4 other boys that were in Les Miserables. I'm very proud of that because we were the first show, Les Miserables. We were the first to do Les Miserables Cares. We called it West End Cares. After Broadway had started calling it Broadway Cares and Equity Fights AIDS, we set up Les Mis Cares, and then all the other theatres got their teams of people together in the shows, and we raised a lot of money. We raised hundreds, thousands, millions. In the end, we've raised millions.
I mean, round of applause for that.
Well, not just me. Of course, everybody was, celebrities.
What were you doing to raise the money?
Okay. So our first thing was late night cabarets. So we tried, and it's a brilliant thing to do because we never do it in the West End. In America, on Broadway, there are all these late night cabaret places, and we'd never done it in London. Don't know why. We tried to find venues, but what we did was we put shows together, and then first week Les Miserables would do it, and then Crazy for You would do it, and then Phantom of the Opera would do it, and go around the show. Once you'd organise it, about an hour-long show after the show. So it would start about 11 o'clock at night, go till midnight, and then we.
And it was on a Monday. You did them on a Monday.
Monday night was the first time we picked it because there was most people didn't have a Tuesday matinee. Tuesday matinee was very rare. Lots of people had a Wednesday matinee. Lots of people had a Thursday matinee. So we thought we would get more performers interested if it was a Monday night because they'd had Sunday off. So, people can't moan about being tired. So they'll come and do a late night show on a Monday night. And for a while it was absolutely fantastic. And then it got so some people might do that. I mean, we had celebrities supporting us. We had marvellous support from the stage management, from the musicians, from the whole theatre population, really.
Just zooming a bit more forward in time and start thinking about some questions, because I'm going to come to you all soon.
We have a little drink. We have a gin.
When you came to write this book about this experience, which you hadn't planned to do at all until you were in this small little TV show that captured the nation and the world, as publishers came to you and said, we need your story, you need to write a book, and then you had to sit down and you had to remember all of these things and remember the friends that you had supported and the friends that you'd lost, the dear ones. And I'm just curious, as someone who's now written a book, what was that like for you in the writing process of, how did you approach that, and how did you manage the feelings that were coming up through that?
So it is an interesting question. I think it is, because it is hard. You create your own memories in your mind, and you think, is that right? What I've remembered. So I had friends. I was ringing up people, going, "Do you remember this? Do you remember that?" I had a couple of friends who were extremely helpful in going through and reminding us what to say. And you think, okay, is that a boring story? Is that a good story? I don't know, because I'd never written anything before. All I knew is I do like literature. I love books. I love poetry. I love all that myself. So I thought, okay, I'm going to... And some people said to me, it's an important story. It's part of history. And I almost felt like I better had tried to do this, because I feel a bit of a responsibility now. In a way, very privileged, because somebody rings you and says, do you want to write a book? Then you are a bit shocked, thinking, really? Because I knew, it's kind of been written, because Russell had written It's a Sin, how are you ever going to follow Russell? So, you know, but then again, people say it's a completely different thing. And so I tried to do my best. And then they said, okay, I wrote it myself because I thought there was no real way to write it through anybody else, really. Although I had publisher saying every second, you know, you send something off. I'm sure you're all so knowledgeable about things like this, but I wasn't. And I send off something, I think, oh, I've done this paragraph, this story, I mean, this chapter, it's great. And then I get a message saying, no, too many people in it, cut them, you know, keep to the story, don't wander off. And they told me, this is what they told me, stop putting in exclamation marks. Because I would write something and I think, well, that's great, that's a really exclamation mark. They said, no exclamation marks, so I was forbidden.
I think I read someone once saying that you should never use more than 2 exclamation marks in an entire book.
There you go.
Because you devalue them. There can be no more than 2 things that are worth an exclamation mark.
There you go. And in my first chapter, I probably had about 20. I thought that was all worth an exclamation mark.
But one of the reasons why the book's so important and why I mean, you said, like, how could I possibly follow Russell? Russell had made this TV show, but it didn't centre Jill, that TV show. No. And generally, like, women's stories in this theme, in this subject matter, have been overlooked and not included, or they've been a marginal character.
Yes.
And what's great and so important about this book is that it puts this particular woman's story at the centre, and it's from your perspective.
Okay.
So I'm just, like, was that something that you were thinking of, or why do you think that women's stories have been overlooked in the HIV/AIDS storytelling?
Oh, well, that's 2 questions
yes,
there,
it is.
I think.
Sorry about that.
No, you asked me as many questions as you like, but I was, like, about my story, I thought, does anybody really want to know that story? On top of having had the It's a Sin thing. And, you know, you never feel like your own story is going to be, I don't know, are people ever going to be interested about that? But as far as women's stories go, then there are remarkable women involved in, you know, I met a lady at the Royal Free Hospital who set up a charity, who was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS in childbirth. Her daughter had full-blown AIDS, and it was a charity called Quack, which was a Children with AIDS charity, trying to just organise some childcare for people, you know. And she had, right at the beginning, so she had no chance of any treatment. She was incredibly brave. Amazing story of lesbian women who were supporting their male friends who were stepping up, you know. And Russell himself said he couldn't tell the stories about everybody, the story he was writing, but he wanted to acknowledge that amongst the nurses who were absolutely incredible after the initial fear, because as things moved on, people became very different in the medical profession. And you met these women, these young girls, they weren't, you know, young nurses who every one of their patients died. Every single one, even with COVID, you know, you watch how the National Health and the people dealing with that and the trauma, and some people died and some people recovered, but those young nurses, and they were male and female, but lots of girls, female nurses, every patient died. There was nobody that lived, you know, and if anybody lived a year, 2 years, when my friend died, he lived 4.5 years with full-blown AIDS. That was after he was diagnosed HIV. He was already immune damaged when he was diagnosed HIV positive. He lived another 4.5 years. He was the longest surviving patient at the Royal Free Hospital at that time. So he had an incredible fight, but that he was the longest surviving. Most people didn't live anything like that long. So it's hard, that.
So why do you think women's stories and some of these remarkable women that you mentioned have been overlooked so long? Because in so many books and films, it's all around, you know, the men, which you can understand in many ways.
Yeah, you can understand. I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because I think that, like, women are really being recognised more in the last decades. You know, it's always been slower to tell women's stories, I think. I mean, people are still learning about Marie Curie and amazing women like that, you know. You're still learning. It's most writers, from history, women's stories have always been not as widespread as men's stories. So I suppose that's, you know, I think now there's a really good time for women's stories.
Yeah.
All kinds of women's stories. And there are a lot in the world of HIV, not just among people who are, who are ill themselves or lived through it themselves or are living with HIV, not forgetting all the people in other countries, like people who are trying to help people who are living in South Africa and places like that, which are absolutely devastated with the population and women, you know, they're infected with HIV, and you have to look at women's rights, and it's a massively complicated situation whereby, you know, you trying to try to teach people to use, now it's about getting triple combination and therapy and treatment, but early on it was about trying to get people to use condoms to have safe sex, and that was extraordinarily difficult. I mean, I don't know if it's right, but one time with West End Cares, we were through the charity, paying for a vehicle to go around the townships in South Africa, and somebody said to me, there are only three HIV nurses for the entire sub-Saharan Africa, looking after, you know, with
specializing.
Wow. Yeah. So and this was way back now, so obviously it was the early days, but you know, but it was a mystery to people. So
yeah,
I don't know if that's 100% true, but I was told that.
I think we should get some questions from the audience. What do you think?
Oh, go on then.
So please raise your hand if you want to ask Jill a question, and I'll come to you.
Jill, thank you for that. That was really fascinating. I'm interested to know about when you, at the height of the support that you were given to your friends, did you share any of that with your family? And what was the sort of link and the relationship with your mum and dad back home in Wales? And how much did you disclose to them? And where did you get your support from to support your friends?
Well, I think that I did share it with my mum. I did, eventually. Only I used to worry that my mum would worry, if you know what I mean. You know, when you're trying to tell your parents, and you don't want to worry your parents because they're living in Wales, and you know, so I would tell my mum, and then my mum wouldn't want to worry my dad. So it's kind of like that vicious circle sort of thing. But I think that my support, definitely my mum was supportive, and my parents, but both brilliant, and it was amazing when one of my friends was very sick that my dad came up to see me, and I thought, God, that's quite amazing. I wasn't expecting my dad to come up and see if everything was okay. But I think that we supported each other amongst our friends. That's where the real support came, because you all felt that you were kind of in it together, even though you were being secretive about it. There was still support going on, but everyone was keeping secrets. That's the strange thing about it. That I think that the LGBTQ, the support, they were incredibly supportive. Without the LGBTQ community, I don't know what on earth would have happened. Because I think that there was a great deal of neglect from the government at that time, but the community didn't sit in silence, and so people, you know, stepped up and tried to do their best, really. So, yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to ask what your reaction was to the actual series.
To the Is This In series?
Yes.
My reaction?
Yes.
I was terrified when it came on, because I thought, you know, because I was playing the part of Jill's mother, and it was very interesting because first of all, as an actress, I was nervous, thinking, okay, I hope this is going to work. And secondly, I was nervous as to how it was going to be accepted, because we didn't know. I mean, it was a complete surprise that it was so well received. I mean, you know, Russell, what Russell does is going to have some well reception. You know, he's never going to, he's always going to be brilliant. In my opinion, he's brilliant. In lots of people's opinion, he's brilliant. So you know that some people are going to be positive. But he really did think that it would be as unlimited, because he couldn't get anyone to put it on. He wanted to write 8 episodes. Even Channel 4 said maximum of 5 episodes. So nobody really wanted it. And then all of a sudden, it suddenly became, people really liked it. And so we were amazed, really, how it became. And I was amazed.
It was just incredible.
It's extraordinary how people feel about it. Honestly, we were amazed, and I was amazed. And we all became amazed then. You start getting, and of course you're absolutely thrilled that the series is a success, because that's part of work. But the most amazing thing was that people didn't really seem to know anything about HIV and AIDS of that time. You feel like you didn't really, nobody knew about it, which is incredible.
I was born in early 60s, and it was just swept under the carpet.
Yeah.
And it was just the horror stories that you saw in the press. That's how it was portrayed.
That's right, and it was portrayed like that. And then also you had the weird thing of it being, that the doctors and nurses were terrified in the beginning. Of course they were, but but it seemed to be like it was like treated like a plague. And so the series, we've all been amazed. There's not one person who hasn't been amazed.
It was a story that needed telling.
Oh, that's nice. And I'm amazed. I mean, I'm amazed to be here. I'm amazed to have written anything, and it's the weirdest sort of thing to have lovely things happen out of all that loss.
Yeah.
And so I want to do my best to tell their stories now and to make, lovely things happen for younger people, or, whatever you can do that spreads the word. And
that is another amazing feature of the book, is that it's a real tribute to the friends that you lost.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay,
it shares their stories, and it shows the support that you gave, the support that they gave you, and all each other, and just it's a real tribute to some amazing people that are no longer with us as well.
Yeah, I hope so, because that's really because and they kept saying you have to write a bit about you. I started to write about them, and then said you've got to write a bit about yourself, and I found that hard, really. I found it hard to talk about myself all the time, even though
you've just done it for 55 minutes.
I know, I'm getting to find it easier all the time, clearly. But I have done it a few times, but I was very nervous of doing that. I was nervous to do it. Are people interested? And there's amazing stories about people who think, are they really interested in me?
I think they are. Because we've got 2 more questions up here.
Okay.
Why do you think now is the time that It's a Sin came out, and your book there? Is there any particular reason that it's so much further on? Why is now such a good time for this information and this story to come out?
Because of COVID, people have lived through a pandemic and are continuing to live through things. So initially we thought, oh my gosh, this could make it horrible because people are already suffering from knowing about one illness. But I think it opened people's eyes to what was going on in the past as well, without realizing. So I think it might have been the knowledge that they missed out what was happening, and that might make it a good time. And I suppose it's with me, with writing a book, it was after the interest of It's a Sin, so it's a continuation of the interest in that. I think there's, because that has made people aware of something they weren't aware about, and they might be interested in a bit more knowledge about it.
And the person behind, hi.
It's not a question, really. I just want to say thank you for you sort of bringing all this together. I have met Russell before and I thanked him, but there you go, it's your turn.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's lovely of you to say that, really, honestly, because, and I think Russell is amazing, and he's busy on his next project, so he's doing
Doctor Who?
Well,
there's
he's
another thing.
got Doctor Who going, and he's also got Nolly. It's called Nolly. And that's my nickname when I was doing Les Mis. That's not about me. It's nothing to do with me. But that's just so weird. But he is writing about Noel Gordon, the life story of Noel Gordon, and she's been played by Helena Bonham Carter. So he's deep in the middle of filming that. then he's got a long stretch of doing Doctor
Who.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more? Yeah, we've got another 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Let's keep going then. Yeah, down here.
You touched on the press and the horror stories that thing. How thankful are we that we don't have social media? We didn't have social media at that time, and the damage that could have caused to the LGBT community, even up to this day.
Can you imagine? I mean,
I
it would
don't
have
want to
been.
think about it.
It would have been terrifying if that amount of abuse had gone on social media on a bad way. I'm sure that the LGBTQ community would have answered back, though. I'm sure that people would have stood up. But the terrifying thing is that people get spoken about and you don't even know that you've been spoken about. So if somebody was spotted, or because people would hide. When you went to hospital and that, people would hide. People would not use their real names. People would, you know, and there were famous people involved, actors that you might recognize. So that would have been a terrifying thing for people who were in the public eye, to have been spotted at a hospital and then maybe on an HIV ward or something like that, because, you know, it would have been vicious. There's no doubt about that, because social media can be terrifying, and that's the truth, isn't it? And it can be brilliant because you can stand up for something, you can put your cause out there, you can get on Twitter and you know, make a statement, but you can also expose people very cruelly.
I remember an HIV nurse told me he was working on an HIV ward in the from the mid-80s onwards, and he said how they had to be really careful about who they let into the ward, meaning visitors.
Yes.
Because the press would often send journalists in if they'd heard that a certain high-profile person was sick and was on that ward. And he said there was one time when someone came to deliver some flowers and said, you know, I'm delivering some flowers for so-and-so. Have I got the right ward? Is this where he is? Obviously saying the name. And the nurse got the whiff that actually this was not a flower delivery. This was a journalist who was trying to get confirmation that that person, that famous person, was on the ward.
Well, I heard that the press, when Freddie Mercury was ill, and that was massive news, that the press used to dress up as doctors and try and get into the hospital dressed in disguise, dressed as doctors or nurses, and try and get in. So, you know, it was a massive story. It was a massive story for Rock Hudson, massive stories for other actors, you know, that actors that were gay at the time. And
down here.
I was just curious as to what extent the individual stories you told, that was shown in the series, the actual men who died, how fictionalised were they? Were they sort of based on real-life cases?
Very much based on real-life cases, very much so. Very much stories of a mixture of stories. So there was nothing in there that wasn't based on truth. But there was like a mixture of people, so it might be one person's story mixed with another person's story, mixed with a lot of general stories, because, you know, for instance, the scene where the family were burning the guy's possessions. I mean, we heard that often, that people, you know, just destroyed everything, didn't want to know about it, or you know, somebody stood up at a funeral. I mean, I'm not sure that there was the scene where somebody stood up in the funeral and mentioned the man's boyfriend. I don't know that anybody actually did that, but certainly did after a funeral, or certainly all that kind of thing of you not having any say in your partner's, you know, will, or, you know, people who'd lived together had no say. I mean, all of that is true. All of that stuff is true. And it was all happening all at the same time. You know, people weren't recognized as partners, weren't recognized, I mean, after lifelong partnerships. That was the monstrosity that was happening to gay men who'd been living with people for 20 years. And still, I have friends who live together. I mean, they're alive. They admitted to being partners only about 5 years ago. They lived together for 35 years. And you think, well, how come your parents have never, ever even asked? It seemed like people, you kind of get, But at that time, if one of them had passed from AIDS, had died of AIDS, they would have had no say whatsoever in what happened to that person for the funeral or anything like that. So all that, there's nothing in that series of Russell's that wasn't based on truth.
So this book is just coming out now.
Yes.
Officially, it's published actually this coming week.
Yes.
Is that right? But it's available. It's going to be available to buy in the lobby there.
This is the first ever. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. I think the Bradford Literary Festival is quite amazing because all this stuff's going on, and I've never sold a book before till today. So.
Sell. So what's your, you're launching this book. What's your intention with this book? What do you want it to do?
Well, I want it, first of all, I really want people to think it's okay. I really want people to think it's interesting.
It's okay. It's definitely okay. It's
well,
amazing.
My thing, thank you. No, but I really felt like that. I thought people, because I read a lot, sometimes you think people say that was dreadful, and I'm thinking all the time of making it quality, a decent quality for people to read, to understand my lovely friends, to love them. I wanted to make them feel as if you might love them or understand why they were so lovable and so amazing, because like everybody, all they wanted to do was have a life and, have fun and achieve things, and that was all taken away. So I wanted people to understand that and to understand the history of it, really, to share it, really, and see if it comes to life for people, I would say.
I think it definitely does. And I think it's amazing to think, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how much we've moved on with this particular virus, and how much the science and the medicine has moved on. And now we have a drug called PrEP that people can get for free on the NHS, which prevents you contracting the virus if you're at high risk, or anyone can get PrEP. It's a drug that you can take daily, or you take it event-based, as they call it, and it means that you're not ever going to contract HIV, even if you're having sex with someone who is HIV positive. And if you are HIV positive, very quickly you can get on treatment which reduces the virus in your body to a level that is called undetectable, which means that you can't pass that virus on to anyone. They can't even detect it in you anymore. And you can't pass it on to somebody if you're having sex with them.
Which is amazing.
Which is amazing that we've reached that stage with this virus. And it shows you just all the amount of effort that has gone in, the sort of emotional and practical support of people like Jill, and then obviously all the medical stuff and the science
Incredible.
stuff.
I mean, it's unique, I think, in the way it's come round, and the way it has come from a complete death sentence to a completely livable illness. That's an incredible process.
If you're undetectable, then your life expectancy is exactly the same as someone who had never been diagnosed HIV positive before. So Jill, you're going to be signing books in the lobby afterwards, and I just want to kind of sum up by saying that it's a quote in at the beginning of one of the chapters, and I think that for me, it's the most powerful message of the book, really, because it connects with your relationship over the decades with Russell, and then your relationship with all of the friends that you talk about in the book. And it's the quote is, "Friendship is a single soul in two bodies." So I think with that, I just wanted to say thank you to Jill for being an amazing friend and the model of friendship, actually.
Thank you. Well, I've got lovely friends, you see. That's
So thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.